What about now, y'all? I sure did, Sarah. Thank you. Can y'all hear me now? What about now? Are we back? I believe we are because I see my audio bar is working on the end. Alright, don't know what was up with that. Yeah, back for now. It's the way it rolls around here. Tech gremlins are my nemesis. I don't know what it is. But we've got a pretty classic tornado outbreak, severe weather outbreak scenario taking shape for tomorrow. And if we look at SPC's day 2 outlook, they have a very, very large area highlighted for the risk of severe weather. Pretty much all the way up from the Nebraska-South Dakota border all the way down to pretty much the Dallas area where Texas base is down here. But I'm definitely not going to be hanging around Texas base tomorrow for the marginal risk end of the setup. I will be heading north, probably chasing somewhere in the marginal risk area as it stands right now, but pretty much a very large section of the country going to be at risk for severe weather. And of course, when we take a look at our water vapor satellite, which is how I always like to start off, you can see here comes our system right here. You see it churning away over the central Rockies there, southern Idaho, and here's the base of our trough coming in like this. You can see the moisture and the high clouds already starting to spread out ahead of it. This system that was kind of the last step of the active severe weather that we just saw is on its way out there. So kind of one system exits stage right, the other enters stage left. And of concerning note with this setup already is I'm down here in Dallas and it is humid and it is disgusting outside. When you step outside, it's instant sweat. So it's very humid. So there's a lot of moisture. There's a lot of energy in the atmosphere right now. This system, as it departed, it only brought a cold front, about yay south, and it's a weak cold front at best. So this one did not drag a cold front into the Gulf of Mexico to scour out the moisture. And in fact, when we take a look at our surface data and our surface observations, let me change pen colors here. You can see there's already deep moisture in place. We have dew points in the low to mid 60s. Yeah, pretty much already in place across much of the southern plains here. So you have our 60-degree dew points are already sitting approximately up to the Kansas Oklahoma border. So I'm tracing the 60-degree isotropy they call it. That's basically your dew point counters. So this green line is your 60-degree dew points here. We do have some 70s even further south. So let's trace the 70-degree dew point line here as best I can. Something like that. And then it goes from roughly, let's see, 70, roughly like this. So you have 70-degree dew points already in place. And one of the things we always talk about when it comes to a severe weather system is the degree of moisture that's in place. A lot of times the jet stream energy is there, the kinematics are there, the synoptics are there, but it's always where is the moisture? And when it gets scoured out to the Gulf of Mexico, way down in here, we have to have that moisture getting pumped up from quite a long distance to pull it north, but that is not the case for tomorrow. That moisture is pretty much already here, and it's going to take very little effort for any storm system to tug that very deep and very rich moisture northward. And indeed, that is what's going to happen. Let's jump over to the 18Z NAM model here. The 0Z is coming in right now, but I'll be honest, I don't have time to wait for that to come in. So let's look at the 18Z NAM 500 millibar chart, and we'll show you what exactly is going to happen here, what's driving this system. So we've already established that we have very deep moisture in place, pretty much to this region here. Okay, so here's our deep moisture. It's just sitting there. It's festering. If you're in central Oklahoma, if you're in Texas, it's gross outside. So what happens when you take a storm system like this? Here comes this powerful negative tilt trough just getting ready to slam into the plains tomorrow. Going all the way out to tomorrow evening. This is 7 p.m. Monday. So here's that system arriving. And what happens when you get this type of negative tilt trough? It is a negative tilted system here. Our trough axis goes like this. That means it's a negative tilt system. It's going to be a very mature and a very powerful troughing system. We'll get surface cyclogenesis to commence somewhere in this region here. And that, of course, when you have a surface cyclone, a low pressure, your wind field blows around it like this. So, just imagine you've got all this moisture, all this energy sitting down here. You add a low pressure system there that enhances the wind fields. What does it do? It pulls and it yanks that moisture northward. Especially since it's already in place, it doesn't have far to go, and there's already the deep moisture in place. Sometimes when these systems start out, our moisture is all the way down here, and you get a low pressure system up here, and there's always questions like, how much moisture is it going to be able to pull north? How much energy is it going to be able to pull north? Tomorrow, not really an issue. And this is a pretty classic looking trough, pretty classic jet stream orientation to get big time severe weather over the plains. Now let's look at our surface dew points. And this illustrates what I've already talked about, what I just showed on the surface observations. Here's our pool of deep moisture this evening. So this is the 18Z NAM. So, we start at this afternoon. We go into the overnight hours. Here's about right now, 3Z. It's a couple hours away, but, watch what happens throughout the day tomorrow. That moisture gets very far north very easily because it's already there, and we'll get a surface low to develop somewhere around the Nebraska Panhandle with a very, very sharp dry line setting up pretty much from the very southern tip of South Dakota all the way down, all the way across Texas into Mexico. And this dry line boundary is going to be responsible for igniting thunderstorms along it, pretty much along its entire path here. So we have a boundary very favorably oriented to fire off numerous severe thunderstorms. And because we have plenty of Gulf moisture in place, moisture is a key ingredient of our atmospheric instability. We talk about CAPE all the time, and you can see tomorrow there is plenty of it, especially the further south you go where that deeper moisture is. Let me change sectors to the southern plains here. It illustrates it a little bit better. I know we're missing northern portions of this, like Nebraska and stuff, but this illustrates just how much energy is going to be pulled north tomorrow. These are extreme values of instability. Okay, you only need about 1,500 to 2,000 to get significant severe weather. That's the blues and the greens here, but when you start getting this, that is a sign, a very concerning signal for just explosive amounts of energy, thanks to that pocket of that pool, that reservoir of deep moisture already in place across portions of Oklahoma and Texas. This system is going to have no issues pulling that forward. So, then we start looking at some of our other ingredients here. This is taking a look at the surface pattern on the 18Z NAM. We'll jump over to the 0Z HRRR in a moment. And you can very easily kind of pick out where that dry line is, right in this area here. And another thing I noticed is just how large of an area of backed flow we have. These southeasterly winds, another very critical component into Great Plains tornado outbreaks, is the degree of directional shear we have. Backed surface flow and backed strong surface flow is a major component of these multi-state widespread tornado outbreaks, and we have that in abundance tomorrow. I can pretty much circle this whole area from eastern Kansas to roughly the Red River, and we just have a large reservoir of backed flow there. So that tells me right off the bat that the wind shear profiles are going to be very favorable for supercell thunderstorms here. And even zooming in, going further north up into Nebraska, just a continued area of backed flow across multiple states here. So a very, very impressive looking system here. And you can see this is just about where the NAM model starts to fire thunderstorms. It's going to start, the signal that we're seeing now is that there's storms are first going to form further north along the storm system. Okay, this system is going to span, multiple states. Look how large this sucker is. This is a big storm system here with the surface low taking shape somewhere in the Nebraska Panhandle, maybe even western South Dakota. So we're talking about a large area under the gun here. And we think you get your greatest amount of forcing closer to your low. So your low pressure system center is somewhere up here. There's going to be a warm front draped in this area. Then you've got your dry line down like this. So your greatest area of forcing is always going to be up kind of just southeast of the low. So storms will probably first get going across northern Kansas, much of eastern Nebraska, perhaps even far southern South Dakota, probably by as early as 1 or 2 p.m. up here. And then later throughout the day, they're going to spread further south, where there's just a little bit less frontal forcing down south, but that also is slightly concerning for storm mode, especially as we go further south. And this is illustrated on the 0Z HRRR quite nicely. So let's take a look at the simulated reflectivity. This is everybody's favorite plot. It's one of mine. We like to look at the simulated reflectivity because it pretty much just shows us what we want to know. Where are the storms going to be? And it has a fairly good handle on things here. So you see these thunderstorms. This is only 18Z, so 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. We first see supercell thunderstorms erupting along that dry line. Southern Nebraska, I-80 corridor, the Kearney, Nebraska area, maybe somewhere around Hayes, Kansas, those areas. We see thunderstorms developing in these areas as early as lunchtime. And then they begin to spread further south throughout the day. And the HRRR and some of these models are picking up on a rather interesting feature that I'll point out here in a second here, and that's this line that you see out ahead of it there. So, and I'll explain what that is here in just a second. And then you see by the time we get to 23Z, which is 6 p.m., you see some real isolated hog demons down there further south here. That was actually the 18Z HRRR. This is the 0Z HRRR, but pretty much similar scenario. It hasn't wavered much, just shows, kind of different, storms are maybe in a different county. But overall, the system evolution being forecast remains consistent, and I don't see how it's going to deviate from this point. But you can see, the simulated reflectivity here on the HRRR shows a very concerning scenario across a wide area. And what's especially concerning when we talk about tornado outbreak potential is the fact that we're starting to see signs of a prefrontal trough or a prefrontal confluence band here. So if this comes to fruition, we could have two initiating boundaries for thunderstorms. To make this just, extra, as if it wasn't bad enough, this could bring it to sort of next level here. So we're going to be watching for this feature very carefully. And it might be a little bit difficult to see, especially if you're watching, on mobile here. But let's trace the dry line. Okay, I'm going to go over here. And I'll first trace the location of our dry line back further west here, central Kansas. It's very obvious when you look at a dew point map where our dry line is. Very, very sharp, very tight dry line. And then boom, you can see how it fires the thunderstorms there. But what's also interesting to note, and you won't see this from looking at a dew point map, you have to look at a plot that takes into account wind direction, is the potential for this sort of prefrontal trough or prefrontal area of convergence or confluence band. And these are very, very subtle changes in wind direction, but you almost see slight hints of that here as we get later. I think it was the 23Z that showed that quite well. Yeah, there we go. let me erase this little mark here. So, we see some southerly winds over in this area here and some southeasterly winds here. So you have a little bit of southerly flow here and a little bit of southeasterly flow here. And then your main dry line, your southwesterly winds are back here because you still have southeasterlies and southerlies in this direction. So that's something that clues us in. You still have southeasterlies over here. So the fact that we have this potentially second area of convergence setting up ahead of that, that is what the HRRR fires this other round of storms. You see how there's 2 rounds of storms there? That is due to that secondary area of convergence that we're perhaps seeing ahead of the dry line. And when you get just a subtle area of convergence like this in an area with big instability and favorable wind shear, that could set the stage for a first round of initial supercells before another round of storms becomes forced up by the dry line. You're going to have your greatest amount of forcing along the dry line. That's why up here, especially later in the day, these storms have more of a linear kind of clustery appearance to them because of all that forcing along the dry line. The stronger your storm system, the faster your frontal boundaries move, the more forcing there is. And this is a very powerful system. So there's a lot of forcing, quick moving frontal boundaries there. So you force up more updrafts and force up more thunderstorms as a result. But in terms of tornadic supercells, sometimes that could be a concerning factor for supercells because if you're forcing up too many thunderstorms, we know the most prolific tornado producers, they need to be isolated, they need to be discrete. Too many storms close together. Linear modes doesn't favor strong long track tornadoes as much unless we're talking about QLCS type tornadoes, which will also be on the table as well. It's pretty much the full gauntlet. But out ahead of that dry line, if we see an area of more subtle convergence, you're only going to get a few isolated updrafts in a more subtle convergent regime. You're only going to get a few updrafts there. So that is potentially a scenario to watch out for, to get an initial round of tornadic supercells and then another round of severe weather along the dry line. So this could be a 1-2 punch wherever that sets up. Currently, this model suggests it'll be central Kansas, right there along the I-35 corridor, say from, like McPherson, Kansas, down through about Oklahoma City. That's going to be a corridor for enhanced severe potential to watch out for. Then, of course, by the time we get to late evening, the dry line really lights up down here in that area of explosive instability regime here. You see extreme discrete supercell mode here, especially across northern Oklahoma. This is probably where all the storm chasers are going to end up tomorrow. It's the area I'm sort of eyeing myself. And you have a little bit less and more subtle forcing in this area as well because of the orientation of your initiating boundary. Your dry line is very sharp, very steep up here, but then it kind of curls back to the west like this. Let me see if that shows up well on the dew point plot here. So there's a little bit of, I didn't draw it quite right there, but there's a little bit of curvature on the dry line there. So you end up with just a little bit less forcing there. So you don't get that linear mode that you get further north here. Now, these are still going to be producing severe weather, embedded circulations, strong straight line winds, and that sort of thing. But later in the day, later in the evening, on the southern mode here, this is where we could see the most intense supercell development, especially ahead of that dry line there. And that is why SPC has their moderate risk to cover for this area here. So this is a very favorable environment. And you see the whole thing just lights up as we get to the overnight hours. So this is 9 p.m. This is going to rage on after dark and through the overnight hours. So it's not going to be a situation where we lose the daytime instability and the storms sort of lose their punch. The kinematics, the low-level jet, the wind field is really going to ramp up after dark there and offset any loss of instability that we see with the setting sun. And that should be enough to maintain these thunderstorms, especially across the southern mode here. Now let's jump over to Pivotal. And the other thing that we notice here is just how classically oriented this mid-level jet is. This is the 500 millibar chart for 23Z or 6 p.m. tomorrow. And you see just the entire warm sector is overspread with this very powerful jet stream here. Just a classic look for big time severe weather. You know, some of the setups that we saw earlier in this year before it really woke up recently was our trough was always lagging a little bit. So we'd have all that juice, we'd have all that energy in place here, but the trough would be, you know, just kind of lagging back to the west here where we didn't have all this flow. So we were always wondering, you know, that's why the cap wouldn't break. You know, there was that one day, what was it, April 15th, I think. You know, myself and all the other storm chasers, we sat around in this area all day. It was another hyped up day, big time potential, big energy, favorable wind shear, but the trough was lagging. We didn't have all of this. This piece was missing. This piece was pretty much just right here. Okay, so the trough was lagging. That wasn't, so we lost our forcing for ascent. All of our ascent is back here. This is where your cold air is. That helps break and remove any cap. But tomorrow we have a full negative tilt trough, very powerful 500 millibar winds overspreading the entire warm sector. So you've got very favorable wind shear across this whole area. Then you take into account the energy there. Let's look at the surface-based cape, even though mixed layer cape's a little bit better. But we just highlighted where the best 500 millibar flow is. I forget pivotal. You don't do what COD does and keep me in the same spot there. But see how it overlaps. That flow just overlaps where all of that energy is. And that will set the stage for plenty of severe storms tomorrow. It's definitely going to be an active day. It's going to be a very, very long active day. We could take a look at a couple soundings here. Let's look at the low-level jet. That is one thing I haven't done yet here. Upper air dynamics. 850 temperature, height, and wind. There we go. So let's look at our 850 jet. Now check this sucker out. This. And this is what keeps the storms going after dark. So we see how that 850 millibar jet, another critical component. This is the low-level jet. This is another critical component into maintaining supercell mode and especially tornado genesis here. And that is also very favorably oriented. You want to see your 850 millibar jet, especially with setups in the Great Plains. Thank you, Debbie, for the super chat here. And here comes Adam fighting with Pivotal to keep me in the same spot here. So this is 0Z Tuesday, so 7 p.m. Monday. So if you can imagine the 500 millibar jet that I just showed y'all, you know, oriented like this. Now you've got your 850 jet roaring in more southerly. That's what helps to start create that wind shear. Very critical component when you see that loaded from the southeast, and it ramps up overnight. We'll step forward a couple more hours here and watch how that gets stronger as the night progresses here. See how those colors, they really start to blossom during the overnight hours. This is a diurnally driven process. This happens every day due to the rising and the setting of the sun. This has little to do with the system. I mean, it kind of does. The stronger your system, the tighter your pressure gradient is, so that also helps. But this is also a diurnally driven process, okay? It practically has to ramp up once the sun sets there. And this will offset any loss of instability that we have. See, supercells and these thunderstorms are driven by two primary mechanisms. You need wind energy and you need heat energy. So you get your thermodynamic energy from the sun, from the moisture, and you get your kinematic energy from the wind. So, and when those two overlap, that's what drives these big time severe weather outbreaks. So even though we're losing some of that thermodynamic energy after sunset, the kinematic energy really ramps up and it helps kind of offset that and keeps these storms going. In addition, we have a strengthening surface cyclone that's also going to be continuing to pump moisture up. Another critical ingredient of big time severe weather outbreaks is what does the moisture do at the 850 millibar level. Oh, looks like Chelsea's in the house. I can make her a moderator now. Whoop. All right. Chelsea's now a moderator along with Seth and Nathan, so y'all better behave. So that is going to be what carries this outbreak into an overnight event, just to keep things going. Now let's take a look at a couple HRRR soundings. We'll go to 0Z, maybe 23Z, because a lot of the ones at 0Z will be convectively contaminated. Take a look at, let's take a look at northern Oklahoma first, where probably a lot of the storm chasers are going to be. So this may actually be somewhat behind the dry line here. Let's back this up. I want to back this up just a tad. Let's go to 23Z, 5 p.m. Sort of near the Oklahoma-Kansas border, kind of the area I'm eyeing from a little bit south there. So rather strongly curved photograph there. So, very beautiful wind shear profile, plenty of streamwise vorticity. Another thing that we like to look at, this is your storm motion vector here, this line here, and then if you want to gauge your level of vorticity, you go to this point and you draw a line to the left, like that. So you take a point here and you draw a line to the left, and you do that up here, and you see we have streamwise vorticity pretty much up the entire low-level column. So those storms are going to be ingesting plenty of spinning air in the low levels there. And streamwise vorticity is very important. If our storm motion was, off in this direction here, get stupid Windows Defender, get out of here. If our vorticity angle was here and our storm motion was to the southeast, you'd end up with crosswise vorticity. Hurts those thunderstorms just a little bit here. So, the very beautifully curved wind shear pretty much up the whole column there. Plenty of moisture, 75 over 69. So very, very loaded storms here. Our LFC and LCL heights, I like to see these close together. Again, your LFC, or level free of convection, that is the point at which the air will rise freely on its own without any forcing help, from a boundary, outflow boundaries, cold fronts, warm fronts. The LFC is your level free of convection, where the air parcel will rise freely on its own, considering the ambient environment in which it exists. The LCL, your lifted condensation level, is your storm base. So the closer those are together, the more favorable tornado production environment we have, because this is essentially the base of your storm, and your air parcel is free to rise right at the base. When the air is rising from the base of your thunderstorm and you have streamwise vorticity down below at the surface, what happens when you go to drink a straw in a cup? You suck that liquid upwards through the straw. The thunderstorms do the same thing. When the parcel is rising freely at the base of the storm, it's going to pull that vorticity upwards, and boom, we get a tornado. That's sort of kind of how it all works. So, this is kind of one of those factors that I like to look for. Generally, when those two are, the closer those are together, the more favorable your environment is for tornadoes. Critical angle, 62. That's pretty good. Usually, the closer to 90, the better. But that's kind of getting a little bit nitpicky there. Everything else is pretty much what we want to see. This is before storms initiate. There's a little bit of capping left here, which is going to help keep things more discreet. We're not going to see. There's no lack of an EML tomorrow. That's going to keep things. That's going to keep a lid on things, or keep it open where we see storms firing at like 1 p.m. So definitely not an issue for tomorrow. Let's jump over to. Is the 0Z NAM in far enough yet? I don't know. Let's see. I think it is actually. Let's look at some 0Z NAM data now that I've rambled long enough that we can actually look at it. How about that? Ooh, some brand new NAM data. We like NAM data here. So check that out. So you see how we're still nicely capped. By Monday afternoon here, 18Z, still a bit of an EML in place. And you can see how further north, the moisture profile is a little bit skinnier up there. So that's where we get some of that just-in-time moisture that we talk about here, up in the northern mode. So we're missing some of that deep moisture in place early on throughout the day. But you see that tongue of moisture, that tongue of instability getting here into far western Kansas by 1 o'clock tomorrow. But down south, we've got this big, wide warm sector. And that is another key to getting these larger scale tornado outbreaks, is how big is your warm sector. And in this case, it covers a very large area. So stair-stepping throughout the afternoon, look how expansive this is. Okay, so our warm sector, we've looked at setups here where this warm sector is only like this wide, or it's just a couple of counties wide because we're getting that kind of just-in-time moisture to squeeze in there. So you get all of the forcing along the front here. And then you get a narrow warm sector, and then you wonder, okay, our storm's going to form, and then they leave it, and then they run out of juice. That happens a lot. You get a thunderstorm that's forced up along a boundary. It leaves your instability sector. That kind of muddies up the forecast a little bit, but that is not the case tomorrow. This is a very wide and a very large, expansive warm sector here. Very concerning look, honestly. Like, this, when you're talking about high-end outbreaks, this is the type of stuff that you're typically looking for here. Very strong backed flow on the NAM. Again, those strong southeasterly winds that we want to see. Let's take a look at a NAM sounding. Let's go like a little bit north of Oklahoma City here. Let's take a look at a sounding from the NAM model. A little bit further south from the one we just pulled here. Check that out. Boom. There's the PDS tornado soundings that we all look for. Very, very, very strong wind field here. Now, there's still a bit of a cap in place here. Okay, this is at 0Z, so 7 p.m. So this is still, we're still in its classic loaded gun scenario here. So you notice your LFC, your level free of convection, is above that cap, and your storm base is, your LCL is still below it here. So, in this case, there's not a thunderstorm ongoing in this environment. But look at this wind shear profile here. Just insane curvature in the low-level photograph there. Pure streamwise vorticity. Let's draw that vector again and look. This is this line here. This is your storm motion vector here. Okay, so that's your vorticity exists along that. So if that's the direction your storm is going, then it's going to have all of that streamwise vorticity just to gobble up. Now, if the photograph looked like this, let's say, and we drew our vorticity vector would be off to the left like this, you'd have crosswise vorticity. That can sometimes thwart tornado development. It's not as favorable for tornadoes, but when you get pure streamwise vorticity like this, that is just a recipe for storms being able to tilt those updrafts here. But just because this sounding still shows classic loaded gun scenario here, very thin EML that should easily be broken. Let's see what happens if I stair step forward another hour. Well, on the NAM it's 3 hours. Let's see what happens if I go 3 hours forward. Same location, just 3 hours later. Now this could be when the dry line passes. Let's just see what we get. Oh gosh, look at that. Now we're in a storm environment after dark. Look at that. Look how much that low-level photograph just explodes to life after dark. And that is due to the low-level jet ramping up here. So just an insane environment with low-level rotation here. And again, that's what's going to help feed these storms after dark. What a difference that makes. Just on the low-level jet ramping up in those 3 hours, we saw how dramatically that photograph shape just changed the look. Now we've got our loaded gun. The cap has been removed. So you see our LFCs are back down here by your LCL. Now that's a surface-based thunderstorm environment that really takes shape and is going to help carry this outbreak into the overnight hours. So just a classic scenario that unfolds here. I'll show you that again. I'll back up. This was taken just north of kind of the Oklahoma City area. So you see the big change. So this is 7 p.m. and this is still very favorable. There's just still a little bit of EML left. Well, that doesn't mean it's game over. It just means you're only going to force up more isolated updrafts in this type of environment. So you can break the cap in several ways. If you achieve the amount of instability and energy needed to break that cap, that's like a game of Brick Breaker. Remember the old classic arcade game, Brick Breaker? It's an analogy I like to use when describing the cap. Those updrafts go up, boom, they hit it, and they bounce back down. They go up, they hit it, and they bounce back down. when you have your cap, each updraft that goes up breaks through just a little bit more, just a little bit more, just a little bit more. And they keep trying and trying, but they need the energy to keep trying, to keep pushing. And then eventually, pow, one breaks through and boom, you get your big thunderstorm there. And we have that type of energy available tomorrow, plus the forcing along the dry. I do not see how that cap holds at all tomorrow, especially when it's this thin. Like, that's not a very thick cap. That's just enough to keep a lid on things just long enough until the environment comes together in the most favorable way to get supercells. And that's really what can drive an outbreak like this home. A lot of times we'll see storm initiation before the best environment is in place. If storms go up too soon, the best environment's not in place, they use up all the energy, and then we don't get the outbreak. If the cap is too strong, there's not enough forcing, there's not enough energy, you can have the best environment in place, but then a storm doesn't form. Tomorrow, it looks like right now that it's all going to come together. So this is 7 p.m. just north of Oklahoma City. Again, we'll show you that big ramp up in the photograph here. That was quite the sight. So we're going to stair step 3 hours from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. and boom, look how much bigger that gets. So, if you're not familiar with weather and tornado forecasting, the bigger this is, the stronger tornado potential that you could see. To sum it up in one word. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to get a tornado every time you see this. This just shows you the environment that a thunderstorm could exist in. Okay, this doesn't guarantee a tornado. It doesn't even guarantee a thunderstorm. But what it says is, if there's a thunderstorm, this is the environment that it's going to be in. And this is a profile that supports strong, long-track tornadoes. We just have to get the thunderstorm. So we look at all of the other environmental factors to see if we're going to get the storms. Right now, all signals point to yes. So that is why we are kind of sounding the alarm bells a little bit for this one. And the HRRR, it shows that nicely. If all you're doing is looking at the simulated reflectivity, which and that's fine because it illustrates well, and it's no surprise that it's showing plenty of supercells kind of mowing through here. Let's look at our updraft helicity swaths. We like those. That's always pretty and fun to look at. So lots of strong long tractors, especially in this southern mode, and because the forcing is going to be stronger further north. Now, there's still going to be tornado potential up here. Eastern Nebraska, northern Kansas, perhaps even as far north as like the South Dakota border. These tornadoes may tend to be a little bit, I don't want to say weaker, but a little bit shorter lived. We have a narrower instability corridor up here that we just looked at here. You can even see that on the HRRR. See how much skinnier the Cape profile is further north? This goes back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier. Boy, that low pressure way up there in South Dakota. But it wraps that moisture, that deep moisture all the way up there into the low. But you end up with a little bit more of a narrower tongue of instability. So, this is your initiating boundary, the dry line. This is your dry line right there. And I didn't mean to draw that. I didn't mean to draw that past. So this is your forcing, your initiating boundary. It's gonna force up thunderstorms all along this boundary. You've got the moisture, you've got the instability, but when you're closer to the low up here, you have multiple boundaries in play. You've got a warm front and you've got a cold front coming back here somewhere like this, in addition to the boundary, in addition to the dry line. So the more boundaries you have, the stronger your forcing is. That's why you get a much quicker linear transition up here. There's more forcing to force up thunderstorms. As we extend further south, you only have a dry line because that warm front is up here, that cold front is back something like this. Your dry line goes like this. So you have less forcing down here. So when we're trying to get thunderstorms, when it comes to having less forcing, now we want to look for the thermodynamics. How else can we get a thunderstorm to form? You can get a thunderstorm to form just from the thermodynamic environment alone. But you need a big open warm sector there with lots of energy. Well, as luck or unluck would have it, look what we've got further south. A much larger, a much wider, expansive warm sector to help aid in thunderstorm development where less forcing exists. Thank you, Derek. Greatly appreciated for the $50 super chat. That'll pay for a tank of gas. That gets me about 350 miles of chasing tomorrow, so greatly appreciated. So we've got less forcing down here. The dry line is a good boundary for initiating thunderstorms. Much bigger, much wider warm sector further south. That is why we see a little bit more of an isolated, more discrete mode further south here. That's why it's honing in on some of these more discrete supercells further south. It also goes back to that prefrontal confluence band that we talked about in the beginning of the video, where you have all your strong forcing up here. This is where you get your more squall line signatures, your QLCS tornadoes. So still a tornado threat because of the strong wind fields involved, but these may be a little bit shorter lived, a little bit briefer. Probably not weaker because the wind fields are going to be so strong. So, up here, this is where you may get a lot of, short-tracked EF2 type tornadoes. They're on the ground for, a couple miles, a little bit shorter lived, but still strong. Down south, because of the less forcing, this is where you're going to get more of a sustained, long-lived cyclic supercell. And you also have higher values of instability, higher values of energy. So this is where your EF3, EF4 plus tornado potential could be down here. It's really setting up just in a classic scenario for especially the southern plains here. Let's go back to the NAM. 0Z NAM here. This is brand new data. I haven't seen this for myself yet. But just look at that low-level jet at 0Z, 7 p.m., and that just continues to ramp up throughout the overnight hours. Wow. So, and the fact that it's already in place, too, throughout the day. We're starting the day, at 40 to 50 knot low-level jet. So that just even pumps that moisture up even more. And a big critical component to tornado outbreaks is what do they do? What does the 850 moisture profile do? A lot of the biggest tornado outbreaks that we see in the central and southern Great Plains involve very strong moisture advection, not only at the surface, but at the 850 millibar level. And it's pretty much already in place tomorrow. But notice this tongue of even deeper moisture coming up at the 850 level as we get into the sunset hours, the 7 p.m. tomorrow and into the overnight hours. So we get even deeper moisture pumping up as the storms are ongoing. That's like Popeye eating the spinach. When you get this type of moisture influx at the 850 millibar level in addition to the surface, it's a big critical component to central and southern plains tornado outbreaks. There's really nothing missing that I can see at this point. Probably about the only fail mode that there is tomorrow to how could this not happen? We hype these up all the time and the setup busts and nothing happened. And these weather guys must be nice to get paid to be right 50% of the time. Let me tell you, it is. Because it's weather. I could wake up tomorrow and this looks totally different. That's just the world that we live in. Right now, really the only fail mode that I see is that perhaps maybe we end up with stronger forcing further south and we get too many thunderstorms that interfere with each other and that kind of thing. Like this does not look like a cap bust. Like thunderstorm formation is practically a certainty tomorrow, okay? If anything, the cap might be a little bit too weak or too thin. With this kind of explosive instability, it is possible that we see thunderstorm development a little bit too soon. That's about the only fail mode that I see right now. But even then, the environment is kind of already in place. So even if we see thunderstorm development too soon, the reason that sometimes doesn't work is because the environment is not in place when those thunderstorms go up too soon. That is not the case tomorrow. We're going to wake up with the environment already in place. It just intensifies more throughout the day. That is also another critical factor of getting an outbreak, a true outbreak, to materialize. Setups that involve more uncertainty involve late timed trough arrivals. You see all these big yellow and red colors here? Like this is 4 o'clock tomorrow, and this is our warm sector. It's already here. It's already there. It just gets more intense throughout the day. And that is a critical timing factor with these systems. The systems that we're usually never sure about is let's say this was 7 o'clock tomorrow. Okay, we have this big open warm sector, 7 p.m. tomorrow. Myself and all the storm chasers are sitting out there, and here's our trough. It's back here, and we're going, oh, is this going to get here in time? Like, it's just a couple hours too late, and there's this big primed environment here that we're all sitting and we're all waiting for and going, Like, that's not the case tomorrow. The environment is already there. It's just each setup evolves so differently. You have to kind of look at them all from their individual setups for what they are. And, I tend to be a little bit more of a conservative forecaster if you've followed me for a while, but I don't usually sound the alarm bells like too easily. I tend to lead more towards the conservative side of forecasting. For better and worse, because sometimes I'll under forecast an event where it's like, it might not happen, and then it does. But tomorrow, just all the signals appear to be there. The wind shear profiles are they're just pristine. We looked at that sounding, north of Oklahoma City at 0Z. We'll pull one a little bit further north, just for S&Gs here. And again, we have a very, still a little bit of that capping at 0Z, but it's very thin. And that goes away later in the day. But, this already, the longer your hodograph is here, the more deep layer shear, more bulk shear you've got. It's a very long hodograph, favorable for supercells. Lots of curvature in the low levels. And, this would be enough on any given day. But when that low-level jet ramps up, let's do this again. When that low-level jet ramps up, pow, look how much bigger that hodograph gets. That's just insane to see that type of environment ramp up after dark there. So any supercell that is still discrete, any supercell that is still isolated by itself is just going to have a ridiculous amount of wind shear to work with. Very steep lapse rates, 8.2 centers per kilometer. These storms are also going to be chucking grapefruit size hail there. Very steep lapse rates there. Let's take a look at our hail growth zone here. So here's your freezing line. Lots of instability in the hail growth zone here. This is your instability profile here. So this dashed line, this is your, thank you Sheila for that super chat. Greatly appreciated. Boy, y'all are amazing. Like, you really know how to motivate a guy. Dustin, did I get my windshield fixed? I did not get my windshield fixed. It's honestly not cracked that bad. All the cracks are on the passenger side except for one, so it's really not too bad. I'll ride with it until it gets like pitted and starts dripping and leaking. And, if I hit a bump and like glass starts crumbling, it's like, all right, it's time to replace it. But if there's just a few cracks, it's not too bad. I'll usually ride it out. So, we've got very steep lapse rates tomorrow. So, this dashed line is your lifted parcel. Okay, this red line here, this is your temperature. Like this. The area in between, this is your instability. This is your cape. This is where the atmosphere is considered to be unstable. Oh, I have to burn off the dew. That's right. Thank y'all for reminding me. Oh, boy. I got to do what, like 100? Yeesh, I might die. All right, I'll do it after I explain this here for just a second here. Thank you for reminding me because I actually forgot. It's been a while since I've gone live because I've been doing too much storm chasing. But this is your instability profile here. Okay, so here's your freezing line, 0 degrees. So your hail forms above this line. Lots of instability in the hail growth zone there with plenty of also deep layer shear in that level as well. So these, we're going to kind of have an all hazards threat here with very, very, very large hail. I'm just reading. What's up, Kelsey? Kelsey, I think, is going to be joining us on tour, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you're on the Finger of God tour. That's going to be fun. All right. Do I have my machine here to burn off the dew? Good thing I'm wearing shorts. Oh, yeah, there it is. All right, hang on. I'm going to burn off the dew for y'all. If you're new here, if I get at least $20, and on Facebook it's stars, but on YouTube it's super chat, I have to burn off my Mountain Dew and do 20 reps on my stair stepper. All right, so here we go. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14. Technically, I need to do 100 of these. I'm not going to do 100 because I don't want to waste y'all's time. I promise I'll do it after the video, right? So I'll do 40, 26, 27, 30, 36, 37, 38, 39, and 40. All right. Thank you all for making me exercise, because when we're storm chasing, all I'm doing is sitting on my rump. That's what you really came here to see. Geez, Chelsea. Savage. She can hear the thumping downstairs. Savage. Savage comments. All right. So let's talk about the timing, and then maybe I'll wrap this up unless there's any questions here. So we'll talk about the timing, and I'll illustrate this using the, let's use the HRRR. Do we have the NAM nest in? Ooh, what does old Nesty show? Let's look at this first real quick. So much model data. Nest in its typical fashion, a little bit slower, a little bit further west than the HRRR, but it too is also picking up on that confluence band here. Notice that feature's appearing on the nest here. Now it's more linear. The nest isn't as good at resolving supercells as the HRRR is. It tends to overforce things. That's why you see a lot more linear modes here on the NAM nest. The important thing that this model shows is that it shows convection in roughly the same times and roughly the same areas as the HRRR. But the NAM tends to have a slow and west bias with it. And we see that here. A little bit further south, it's got a real hog kind of moving through the Lawton, Oklahoma area. So, but a very similar evolution to what the HRRR is showing, albeit a little bit further west, a little bit further south. We see that a lot with the NAM, but it shows that prefrontal confluence feature as well. You know, and models don't do well with analyzing what's going to happen with these types of features. So, but just the fact that they show them, like, we know meteorologically what that could mean and what they could do. So the fact that 2 of the major CAM models are showing that is, that's a very interesting signal that I see. So here is the HRRR. So when we talk about the timing, things are going to get going first early, probably lunchtime or a little bit after lunchtime, you know, further north. Central northern Nebraska, I-80 corridor to about I-70 corridor in Kansas, you know, roughly Kearney, you know, Hayes area. We'll see thunderstorm development first occur there. Initial supercell mode probably won't last very long. The storms will be supercellular initially when they go up. All hazards, tornadoes, you know, hail, damaging winds. But the further north you are, the faster that these should cluster up a little bit. You know, we'll get either a squall line or some embedded supercell structures in here. We're still going to have a continued tornado threat throughout the afternoon, even as they start to cluster out. But the tornado threat could be a little bit more, you know, they could be a little bit shorter lived, these tornadoes. Not that that makes them any less dangerous. It's just a different type of storm mode. So right now, you know, if we're taking this model for like, you know, minute by minute truth, then we see thunderstorms developing around I-80 in Nebraska, somewhere around the Kearney area by about noon to 1 p.m. And then they're going to start spreading south. That's what we call unzipping. That dry line's going to unzip. Storm development will progress further south throughout the day. So by the time we get to 5 p.m., you know, work just got out, evening rush hour, we start to see thunderstorms developing along the dry line further south of I-70 across Kansas, getting into northwestern Oklahoma. And then that just continues throughout the day. By the time we get to 7Z, you know, full outbreak is probably ongoing at this time. from eastern Nebraska down into central Kansas all the way into northern Oklahoma. I think we're going to see development further south than what the HRRR is showing here. And this is what the NAM nest suggests. I don't see how there'd be a piece of the environment missing down here that we wouldn't see a thunderstorm further south than what the HRRR shows. So, just because the HRRR doesn't show it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. The environment overall is in place. And boy, oh boy, that is just nasty. The overnight portion of this is especially scary across northern Oklahoma. Derek says, how confident is the SPC read the location of the surface low? If it shifts south, more of the most populated parts of Oklahoma, Texas could be threatened. That is exactly right. If the surface low ends up pretty far south, at this point, I don't see big dramatic shifts in where the low tracks. It's already pretty far north. When we look at our water vapor here, you can kind of see it. We see that trough digging right now, and you can see it just in the very early stages, trying to kind of come together over Idaho here, looks like right now. So, this one isn't really, it digs, then we've already got that jet streak rounding the base of the trough. So that's going to help, eject it and go negative tilt. So it doesn't seem too possible at this stage that we're going to see that surface low, end up in Kansas or something like that. Just where all these features are now, with it's taking shape together, somewhere over the Idaho, kind of Nevada area here. It's not compact. It's it's in its very early stages here, but we see that jet streak rounding the base of that trough already in this region here. You can even see some thunderstorms developing in eastern Montana there, associated with the warm air advection. So we're already getting thunderstorm development in eastern Montana as a result of the system taking shape there. So it's probably going to end up, I would say the confidence in where that's going to end up is pretty far high. We're talking a deviation of maybe 50 miles at this point. So, whether the exact center is here or whether it's here or here, or here at any given time, we're only shifting the threat by a couple counties at most, which that's a big deal if you happen to be in one of those counties. But overall, the current forecast looks like it should stay on track, just based on where things are located right now. Yeah, Debbie, I would certainly expect a severe thunderstorm threat in Tulsa. It wouldn't be till later in the overnight hours, the way it looks, unless that prefrontal confluence band really erupts earlier. And that's a very interesting signal. We're going to have to watch that very carefully tomorrow, because that, if this comes to fruition, and it's not a common thing to have happen, but when it does, it goes big. So we'll be watching for that potential, and you can see it matures a couple of these supercells here from Wichita to McPherson. And it tries to get a couple going just north of the Oklahoma City area. But then the dry line kind of overtakes it. And then we end up with that being the main shows. There's actually 2 rounds of supercells here. So we have this round of supercells firing on that confluence band. Actually, these 3. This is kind of your open warm sector confluence band. Then your dry line is back here, firing an additional round of storms. So kind of a 1-2 punch there. And you see it just continues to erupt after dark as well. So anytime you get warm sector confluent supercells going up ahead of your dry line, that's just an extra recipe for, as some say, big problems. So, there's more than one forcing mechanism at play. And I think myself and a lot of storm chasers are going to be targeting that northern Oklahoma area tomorrow, because that just looks nasty. May in Arizona is our windy time of the year. Do our winds affect your weather patterns? They certainly do, positive thinker Helen. What comes from the desert southwest and the wind there, that is the source of our EML, or the cap. That is such a critical component to these severe weather systems. Let me see. What's the best way to illustrate it? I'm on the wrong model here. Let me jump to the NAM. So the biggest influence that the winds from the desert southwest has is that's our source region for the cap. And the cap, it can either make or break a severe weather setup there. If you're a storm chaser, it can be your best friend or your worst enemy. Because that is the source of the dry, warm air that makes up the cap. Okay, it resides over here in the desert southwest. So the winds that come from this region, they eject that EML onto the Great Plains and the severe weather area where we want, if you're a storm, you see how these warm mid-level temperatures, they come from that region here. This is your cap. That's your dry, your elevated mixed layer. Comes from this region here. So if the cap is too strong, then it prevents thunderstorms from happening. If the cap is too weak, then you get too many storms. If the cap is just right, it only allows a couple more discrete storms to develop. So it's like everything just has to time just right to get these things to happen. That's why they're so hard to forecast. There's a lot of factors that go into play, and if just one of them is off by an hour, or if it's 1 degree too high or 1 degree too low, then everything it's totally different. There's such a delicate balance to this stuff. That's why it's so hard to predict. And you do see that cap is a little bit stronger further south tomorrow. I can zoom in. This is 21Z Monday. This is another reason why we see more isolated development further south. Notice we have a stronger cap nosing into portions of the southern plains here. This is 21Z. So it's just a couple degrees stronger there. So just that extra lid strength will only allow the most robust updrafts to break through. Again, it goes back to that game of Brick Breaker. You have a cap that's, 12 degrees Celsius, it's this thin. A cap that's 14 degrees Celsius, is like this. And those updrafts go up, boom, and they hit it, and they hit it, boom, and they hit it, boom, boom, boom. If the cap is weaker, maybe you'll get a couple updrafts to go through. I think I just drew Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob there. But if you have a stronger cap, then you'll only get one updraft to go through. It's just kind of how it works. And we see just a little bit more of a lid in the southern plains. So what does it take to help break that lid? You need more energy. Well, guess what we have down here in the southern plains? We have more energy. You see the highest values of instability are also down here. So it's all coming together. It looks like it. So, there's really nothing that I can find that makes me go, this might not happen tomorrow. So, yeah, it's going to be a busy day. I agree, Lori. The discrete ones are definitely, I think, going to be further south. They'll start off discrete. Kansas, Nebraska is going to be a much shorter window because of the strong forcing of that dry line pushing east there. So it's just screaming isolated hog supercell potential in this region tomorrow. In my opinion, it almost doesn't get more classic than this. So I think we're in for a very significant day tomorrow. If you live in these areas, take all watches and warnings seriously. So I'm about to bounce off of here so I can, I've only been home for like 12 hours. So I've got to finish, with the laundry and getting the chase gear ready and stuff like that. So, I appreciate y'all for tuning in to this discussion. Hopefully it helped to make some things clear, kind of explains how it's all going to come together, the timing of things a little bit, different ways for it to come together. So, if you're new here, hit the like, subscribe button. It's a free way to support the channel as it continues to grow. I'm somewhat new here on YouTube, so, it's all right. I do a lot of activity. I'm very active on Facebook, but appreciate y'all being here. I will be streaming, so I'll have a live stream tomorrow of the chase, as long as the internet providers allow. So stay tuned for that. I'll also be releasing some unseen video for my channel members from the 26th in Nebraska. I have a lot of video that hasn't even seen the light of day yet, and it's good up close video too that I haven't had time to work with it. So I'm just going to throw it in the channel members group, be like, here you go. Here's some raw video that I haven't released. I do plan to do like a full length, almost a movie style production, but that's not going to happen for months because I got to get through all this chasing first. But for now, if you're a channel member, a Facebook subscriber, a Patreon supporter, a YouTube channel member, I'm going to be releasing some of that footage for y'all to watch over the next couple months before I have a chance to really edit it and put it together the way I want to. So I'm going to go ahead and jump off of here. Thank you all once again. If you live in these areas, stay weather aware tomorrow. Stay safe. Take all watches and warnings seriously. I'll be providing updates as I can. So thank you all and have a good evening. I'll catch you on the next